The best investment according to the CEO of the local Builders Association. The opportunities and the risks for builders and real estate developers. The membership group attended by the who's who in local real estate. That and more on today's episode of the Truth About Real Estate show for Canadians. My name is Erman Cito, host of this 300 plus episode show since 2016. This show is ranked number 81 on business category on all of iTunes. Happy holidays, everyone, and what a week. The Federal Reserve in the US, the folks who control interest rates in the US, just announced they are holding the rates and they expect to cut 3 times next year. There's assuming a 0.25% cut each of those cuts, that'd be a 0.75%. And it's been sending the stock market soaring. And I'm a bit surprised Jerome Powell is showing his hand so early in doing a complete reverse on everything else he's been talking about up until this point, in sharing their plan for cuts. So yeah, everything they tried to fix is all being undone pretty quickly, just based on his words. Anyways, the implication to real estate investors is that many expect housing prices to go up once rate cuts begin, including Shark Tank's Barbara Corcoran. She believes that real estate prices will reverse as soon as the interest rates begin. I've included a note in the show note, so a link to the article in the show notes, an interview of Shark Tank's Barbara Corcoran. The implication for Canadians is our own Bank of Canada increased rates faster and higher than the Americans did during the last 2 years. So it's a natural expectation that the Bank of Canada will cut steeper and faster than the Americans. So we should expect more than 3 cuts in 2024. The markets are already expecting rate cuts, about 4 or 5 rate cuts in the tune of 1.25 to 1.5% by the end of 2024. And those cuts are expected to start maybe as early as this spring, like Marchish. So based on history, cause and effect, we should expect to see the market pick up, the real estate market pick up in activity, increase housing demand, pushing prices up, which is good news to many current real estate investors. And this is notice to anyone who's been sitting on the sidelines who's looking to get into the market. We are probably at the bottom. We're approaching the holidays, and that's typically a great time to buy. And again, the market is expecting rate cuts in the spring or even mid-year of 2024. My clients are taking advantage by financing their acquisition of U.S. income properties using their home equity line of credit. Since home equity lines here in Canada, their interest is variable because it's based on the on prime rates, and with rates expecting to fall. And already at current home equity line prices, interest rates, it's cheaper financing than going through an American lender. As long as they can cover the interest and payments, this makes a lot of sense. Positive cash flow and no rent control, of course, will help a lot in reducing the risk of such investments. I really can't wait. Based on all the information that's been coming out, I really can't wait. And also, of course, the extensive amount of research I've done in investing in the States, I really cannot wait to sell some of my properties here. As mentioned in the past, I have 3 houses being listed the second week of January. The timing seems appropriate too. Again, as mentioned, Shark Tank's Barbara Corcoran saying the market is about to pivot. We Canadians with lots of HELOC, and I'll have a lot more HELOC once I've sold 3 houses, will have a strategic advantage over the Americans. This is, again, the American banks only offer, currently only offer 30-year fixed mortgages. So they are more expensive in terms of rates. Their buyer, you would have to expect that American buyers will stay on the sidelines longer, which would give Canadians the flexibility and the strategic advantage of getting in before the Americans do. Because why would an American want to get a new mortgage today at near peak interest rates? On to more serious matters. I'd like to take a moment to reflect on all the humans out there being negatively affected by investing on pre-construction or speculation. There have been many. I'm hearing this all over. It's all over social media, all over Reddit. I'm hearing it in my circles as well. There will be many people who will be walking away from their 15% deposits on pre-construction condos or houses and they're on the hook for any additional costs and losses incurred by the builder when they go to resell that property. In combination with a slowing economy, there's job losses out there. Pretty much all the banks are have announced more cuts as well, and they're supposed to be like the most solid institutions that we have in Canada. In a country with massive affordability issues, someone was going to get burnt. And let's not forget the renters who are praying to stay in their rent-controlled units, as a move could be a disaster in having to pay today's outrageous market rents. A friend of mine recently told me that his downtown Toronto condo that he's owned for about 2 years-ish, bought pre-construction. It's a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, and he rented it out for $3,500 plus utilities. This is in the Liberty Village, which is just west of downtown Toronto. And that's still negative cash flow. So that's not an easy investment for many. This investor is pretty well deep-pocketed. And the rent has gone up $500 over a 2-year period. That's pretty rough for most tenants out there. If the federal Liberals wonder why their polling numbers are looking so bad, well, the bills come due. All that spending they did, all the reckless fiscal and monetary policy they've been doing, and also the fact they did not have the courage to force municipalities to revise their zoning to allow for higher density, and they've simply allowed immigration to just exceed the supply of healthcare, education, and of course, housing. All the while, the Canadian economy is shrinking in real GDP terms. The numbers are actually even worse if you remove the economic growth directly from immigration. If you remove immigration, we are actually negative 4 quarters in a row in terms of GDP, real GDP per capita. And housing affordability hasn't improved that much, and it's about to get worse. Royal LePage, they're all over the news this week as they are forecasting Toronto housing prices to increase by 6% by the end of 2024. So price movement is going to reverse, is what they're predicting. Between rate cuts and rising prices, this is why I've recommended to my clients to wait for a rising market, so to wait till spring to sell, or later. They can hold as long as they want, as long as they can, to sell in order to sell and maximize their sale prices. We investors need all the help that we can get, as investment properties that have long-term tenants in them, they are incredibly out of favor in today's market. So help is on the way. Not help, the market's improving, so that will definitely help all investors out. The housing crisis still exists, though. It's actually going to get worse with the lack of new development going on. There are deals out there for short-term gains for those with deep pockets and strong stomachs. Like I mentioned, there are literally pre-construction, there are newly built condos and houses that are being returned to builders. You better believe those builders are motivated to let those things go at deep discounts. So there is opportunity for those who can stomach it and have the deep pockets. I still believe those who create housing, they will continue. They always have, and they will continue to be profitable investment businesses if executed correctly. And hence, we have a very serious expert today, in our guest, in Michael Cullen Williams, who is the CEO of the West End Home Builders Association. MCW, as he's known to his friends, it's an acronym for his name, has spent his entire working career in planning and building, with a degree in such from Ryerson University, followed by 18 years at Ontario Home Builders Association, before taking on the big job as CEO for almost the last 3 years at the West End Home Builders Association. I know several members of the West End Home Builders Association, that's a mouthful, and they are a close-knit, active community of members with the most major players there, including folks with hundreds of millions of dollars worth of real estate. The cool part is that these crazy rich builders are very approachable and humble in my experience. With all the development craze I'm seeing on social media, if you're one of them, I can't recommend enough that you check out your local nonprofit Builders Association or the Ontario Builders Association, because the prices of membership is quite low, and expect high value networking. There's a saying in Chinese, my parents always said it, and I say it for fun. And the direct translation is, the best things are cheap and high quality, which is why I'm so frugal and always on the hunt for good deals. You can connect with MCW on Twitter. I've given a short link. It's twitter.com/MikeJCW. Again, links are in the show notes. Website is www.westend hba.ca. Mike is happy to speak to anyone interested in joining, so just reach out, tell him you heard him on this show. Please enjoy the show. Happy holidays, folks. Hi, Mike. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So what's keeping you busy these days?
Oh, the fun never stops in the housing industry. I guess the market has slowed, but there's a lot happening in terms of public policy at the municipal level, provincial level, some big federal announcements recently. Despite sales not exactly bursting at the seams the last number of months, there's a lot of stuff still under construction. There's a lot of activity out there.
Have any builders actually taken a pause in terms of building? Because, for example, like one of my neighbors, actually one of my kids' friends' father he actually represents a large number of lumber and drywall providers. And he said they just they're on pace for another record year.
Yeah, for some builders, things are slowing down, but you've got to remember to build a home, it takes a while. Like even a single family or a townhome, that could take 6 months to a year. But when you're getting into the multi-residential high-rise, some of these projects are literally under construction 5, 6, 7 years. So even though the market has slowed in terms of new home or resale home sales, the actual construction activity is very busy based on pretty strong years in 2020, 2021, 2022. Things slowed down on the construction side during the pandemic, but the sales were strong coming out of that. So there was a bit of a lagging effect. So the actual construction activity is very strong, which is great for our economy. There's lots and lots of people employed in the housing sector, whether it's folks like you and I, or the people actually on site swinging the hammers, bankers, lawyers. It's the largest industry in Canada in terms of total employment, and it's a huge diversity of opportunities.
Now, for the listener who doesn't know who you are, this is, I think, your second time
round
on the show?
two.
So only round two?
We'll see if I get invited for round three. We'll see how today goes.
Round two was supposed to be months ago, but I know there are a lot of things going on. Yeah. do you regret taking the promotion? Actually, for the listeners' benefit, tell us about your journey. Tell us your journey in the real estate industry.
So I was born in 1981.
Oh, you're younger than I am.
Yeah. I'm a child of the 80s, yeah. So I went to school for urban planning in late 90s, early 2000s. So my professional background, I'm an urban planner, urbanist, love city building and everything that comes with it. I'm a big transit nerd. So I worked for, when I first graduated, a couple builders, and then worked for the Ontario Home Builders Association for 17 years doing urban planning work related to public policy around housing, land development, a lot of, I'll call it macro planning level policy. So rather than, how do you push building X or site Y through the planning process, it's more what's the provincial legislative framework around our entire land use planning and development system. I moved on from that role in, can't even remember now, 2020, 2021, and took on the role of CEO of the West End Home Builders Association. So we are a nonprofit association representing the new housing and land development industry in sort of the Hamilton, Grimsby, Burlington areas, sort of the west end of the Golden Horseshoe, so to speak. We have 300 member companies. About 65 of them are home builders. And when I say builders, that ranges from the custom builder building like a high-end 1 or 2 units a year to renovators sort of doing conversions to really niche, interesting stuff. And then on the large scale stuff, the folks building towers with the cranes up in downtown Hamilton, or missing middle infill or subdivisions. And then the balance of our membership is sort of the rest of the construction industry, trades, banks, urban planning firms, sort of the, firms that produce steel, lumber yards, et cetera. So our organization represents the interest of the the residential and land development industry, and so there's a lot of government relations and advocacy, a lot of education and professional development, a lot of events. You should come
I
to
do
one or
need to
two of
come.
them.
I sent you guys some people.
Yeah.
I've,
So yeah, lots of networking events and business opportunities for people working together in the industry.
for example, I sent along and I didn't ask her permission to use her name, but I sent along a client of mine, a mother-son combo, because she belongs to those other organizations, and I said, why not join Mike's organization? Because, you know, everyone who's got their name on a sign along the QEW who builds like 300 homes a summer type thing or towers, like they're all at your meetup. You're part of your organization. So if you want to meet the big players, like go there.
Yeah, so if you're involved in the industry, it's a great way to for business networking. Even if you're not a builder, if you're somebody that wants to do business with a builder, whether you sell, we've got folks that do really interesting AV equipment or technology or different products, and it's one thing to have a store and try to sell it to a couple consumers. It's another thing if you can sell it times 300 in
Right,
one
right.
shot to a builder that's installing it
Right.
in their home.
Or at least bounce the idea off
bounce the
someone who builds
idea.
300 homes a summer. Like, like, that's a highly qualified opinion.
Yeah, and I look at housing like a home isn't a home like we think of maybe what a home might have been when 1960 or 1980. Like today in 2023, they are complex machines for living in, whether it's the technology that's involved in them, whether it's some pretty sophisticated heating, ventilation, air conditioning. As we're sort of addressing climate and energy efficiency issues, like these are very complex builds now. It's not just throwing up a bunch of sticks and bricks in a roof. So there's a lot of different companies involved in the industry, a lot of innovation, and yeah, it's a really interesting sector to be involved in 2023.
And then my standpoint is like we have many aspiring builders and developers on listening to this, and I wish them all the best because we only get out of this housing crisis. Well, not the only way, but adding supply would be a great way. And just from my experience, just observing, like people who create housing generally get ahead in life. Tends to be great investments.
Generally, the only caution, and I know you've got an eager audience, it is a tough business.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's a high risk business, and high risk can mean high reward, but the road is littered with those that have tried their best and tried to be innovative and work their way through it. So it is a tough business. It's a highly political business, which is one of the major challenges. Like if you're building a car or a widget or a bakery, like you don't need to go get approval every time you want to sell a muffin, or Ford doesn't need to go get an approval every time it sells a car. So the timelines are long. For better or for worse, you do need capital. Land, labor, and capital are sort of the three major inputs, and in today's interest rate environment, it ain't easy. I don't envy the position a lot of folks are in, especially when they're highly leveraged.
And that seems to be the formula for, because I'm a geek at this stuff, so just observing developers that went under back in like 07, 08, generally they went under because they couldn't support their financial obligations, generally because they had a lot of debt.
Yeah, the industry learned, I think, a lot in 89, 90, 91. We're going back a ways. But the financial
The
sector...
huge Toronto housing crash.
Yeah, massive, and a couple of very large companies like Olympia and York and Bramley went under. I don't think we're going to face that kind of situation, but there are companies out there in stressful situations. But the rules around bank financing have changed a lot for projects to move forward, especially in the high-rise sector. There's a lot of risk there, and that's not for people that are new entrants into the market. But when you're building a 50, 60-story tower, you've got to get to between 70 and 80% pre-sales in advance with deposits before the banks will finance or move forward with the construction loan. loans that size are often syndicated with multiple players, sometimes not just the scheduled banks, sometimes sort of mezzanine players as well. So it gets complicated. There's a very serious underwriting process, and that doesn't say that there's no risk to the system. It's just there's a lot more safeguards and backstops and I think due diligence than perhaps there was 30 years ago. But things happen. Crestford went under in 2020, 2021, and at the time they had 4 massive sold out projects under construction in Toronto, and these weren't little projects. It was 80-story tower at Yonge and Gerrard, 30-story tower at Yonge and College, 2 60-story towers in Yorkville. Like, these were sold out under construction projects. So there is risk.
Is it the pandemic that got them?
No, they ran into some financial trouble. Just they were over leveraged, and construction costs went up significantly during the pandemic. Construction costs have continued to go up. Stats Canada came out with a data point earlier this summer that from 2019, beginning of the pandemic, till now, or I guess earlier this summer, hard construction costs were up 54%. So that's running higher than the rate of inflation. And I mentioned earlier, some of these projects, you've got 5, 6, 7-year timelines. So the challenge is, if you sell a condo unit in, 2019, 2020, it's a huge project. You got to get to your 70, 80% pre-sales. So it might take 2 years, 3 years to hit that. Then you finally get under construction. And if you're building a 50, 60, 70-story tower, it's going to take 5, 6, 7 years of construction. So you've got to have a pro forma when you go to sales, recognizing that you've got a 5, 6, or 7-year runway, and costs go up. Like, you can lock some things into contracts, but the cost of concrete, windows, labor, etc., you've got to build in contingencies. And for some of these projects, like there are projects right now, I know we're sort of more Hamilton Oakville focused here, but there are projects, be it downtown Toronto or downtown Vancouver, that are very large towers that, if they haven't started construction and they were in sales years ago, they're not starting. They don't. They could be 100% sold out, and the revenue is not enough to build the actual tower.
And my mutual friend who introduced us, he was even telling me, like, there's builders who are just building at a loss just to maintain their brand and keep their people busy.
Yeah, some companies, you got to keep the machine rolling, so to speak. For most reputable companies, if they're in real trouble, they can't. But for most companies, they want to deliver. Their brand is important. The handshake, the contract's important. They want to deliver for their customers. Their customers are putting a lot on the line. When you go in a new home sales office and you want to invest in that community, in that future, that means a lot, right? So it's a tough market right now with the sheer volume of cost escalation. It has really put a lot of projects into a difficult place. And, we'll probably get into it in more detail, but, with the Bank of Canada rates, when you listen to the news or hear people chatting about it, it's all about mortgage rates, which it is for the end user, whether you're buying something new and you're going into the bank and you want to put down a deposit or buy a home or buy a resale home, and you're looking at 5-point-something% or more 5-year mortgage rate or whatever the variable rate is now. Like, that's one thing when you're buying $1 million home, but when you're building a $200 or $300 million project, and the timelines are stretched very long, and you don't get your revenue until you close. A few years ago, you could get a construction loans in the 3-4% range. Now, 8-9%. If you're in the secondary markets, you're over 10%. With long timelines, with political uncertainty around approvals, it's a risky business.
So where are we at now? So one thing I want to add, though, is that from the consumer side, like, it seems like there's good deals available, as long as you can finance it, as long as you have enough cash for down payment. preferably more cash, like 50% down.
Yeah.
But like the condo market, for example, I geek out on stats, and for example, condos, I think the September number was, I think there was like 5 months of inventory of condo listings, which is like well into buyer's market. So there's opportunity for people.
100%. I think with when the market slows, right, there's always opportunity. There are builders out there that's might not quite be at that 70 or 80% pre-construction financing, and there may be deals to be had to try to they want to sell, they want to get to that financing mark. There's some existing buildings that are, I'm talking sort of the new construction rather than the resale side. There's some existing buildings that are up or under construction that have some inventory. And we were talking about interest rates. Unfortunately, there are some individuals, some folks out there that maybe over leveraged themselves, that maybe bought a couple years ago, and I don't know, they bought a $600,000 or $700,000 place. They need to pull out a $500,000 mortgage, and it's come time to close, and they can't close. They purchased in a different environment where they thought that they'd have a 3% mortgage, not something more, and they just can't meet the monthly carrying cost, or the bank simply won't close. So there are some individuals that perhaps are in some distress, that maybe there are deals to scoop up. The assignment market, which I understand is a little hotter than normal. I know builders don't love assignments, but like they got to close. So I think 2024 will be interesting, because there's a lot of condo projects that are going to be wrapping up, and the question is everybody going to be able to close? I think lots of people will close, but there'll probably be more opportunities, and I don't love when there's an opportunity when somebody's in distress, but there's probably more opportunities in the next year with some folks that can't close.
It's the unfortunate reality of speculators. If you didn't have solid plans to close, because someone can close, and if they put it up for rent, they'll probably have a renter right away, because the rental market is just on fire.
I mean, I closed on an investment unit in July. I bought in 2019, so despite some market instability,
Right.
I
Good
bought
timing.
around $1,000 a square foot.
Oh my
unit's
God.
worth.
Where is it?
It's a loft conversion, the Weston Bakery lofts at Logan and Eastern. Awesome conversion project. Shout out to Rob Cooper with Altera. They do amazing work.
1,000 a square foot. Wow.
Yeah,
They
I
could
bought a
build
few
it-
years ago. Well, this is
They could
when you
build it
buy
for that.
pre-construction, it's long
Yeah.
timelines, right? So, I was actually just looking at some of the stuff last night, and we basically closed almost 5 years to the date that we bought. Like it's a couple months short, and it's a couple year sales program. Things were slowed down during the pandemic in terms of the builder moving forward, and loft conversions are complicated, so it's not a simple build. But yeah, we're renting close to $5 a square foot, which is insane. But that's the market out there. Like,
Yeah, it's insane.
there's pressure on the price per square foot on the new side, but on the rental side, if you're in Toronto, Hamilton, wherever you are, like if you're close to transit, it's just location, and in the hot market the last number of years, a lot of people made bets on B and C locations, and I'm sure the entry price point was different, but when the market turns, the A locations hold up.
Yeah, it's less risk. This is less risk in general. But yeah, but it may not look as good on a spreadsheet. So before we were recording, for example, I was telling you how I saw on the news that Lime Ridge Mall in Hamilton, there's 2 towers being built, 300 units. I'm like, oh, fantastic. And then I saw it's 2 towers, and they're only 12 stories each. And I thought, wow, that's like the center of Hamilton Mountain. It's like basically the commercial shopping hub. Tesla's building out a service center there. Like, it's all great news, but like 12 stories. Like I thought that area could support a lot more. Because who wouldn't, like, for the mall's benefit, you have built-in customers. I'd want as many as possible. And for the people who are going to live there, there's a mall.
We're seeing a lot more of this trend, and I'll get to the height in a minute, but just like in general, the planner, sort of our term for this is gray fields, not brown fields, gray fields, where throughout North America, you've got lots of either dead malls, dying malls, or malls that are doing all right, but
Yeah.
like there's a lot of parking, and perhaps it might be higher and best use of land to reinvest and bring in some residential.
Like our mall right here across the street, like there's lots of vacancy inside the mall, and the parking lot's humongous.
And you build in customers by having people living there permanently. A lot of these malls are well located, either on highways, on transit. So we've started, I think, in the last 10 years, right across North America. And if I zero in on sort of the greater Golden Horseshoe or GTA and Hamilton area, some of the first malls to do it, like you look at Yorkville on the subway in Toronto and in the parking lots there. There's all kinds of towers going up. So sort of I'll call it the A locations on subways started going up first. Sherway's got a whole bunch of towers. Fairview Mall and the Shepherd Line's got a bunch of towers.
Yeah, Bayview Mall's surrounded by towers.
Right. So for the pension funds or real estate investment trusts and whatnot that own these, or you've had new kind of REITs emerge. So smart centers used to just be a mall. They own malls and where the Walmarts are.
Yeah,
but
Home
now
Depots,
they've got a REIT, and they're starting to look at all of their assets and looking not to sell off with condos, but to have an income stream in terms of rental. Canadian Tire is looking into it. So you've got like Loblaws is looking into it. So they've got, I think it's Choice REIT. So you've got North American or Canadian-wide companies that are looking at their land assets, especially as we're shifting. The population's growing like crazy, and we're shifting more and more towards intensification. And I like to say a lot of the easy sites are gone.
Really? Okay. Because Oakville Place has lots of space.
I'm a Toronto transplant, so the easy sites in Toronto are all gone.
Okay.
When you come out to the 905, like huge opportunity, and the malls are where a lot of the opportunity is. As I said, like
actually, hang on 1 second. So my family, my dad's practice used to be in Market Village. Remember Market Village? I know it's not Toronto, but it's just the other side of Steeles. Can you grace me with that?
Oh, I don't go north of Steeles.
that's the world ends. The edge of the world falls
It
off.
used to be I
after
didn't go north of Bloor, but
But they tore down that mall, and they're building a tower. And before we're recording, I was talking about how in Asia, for example, like every mall is generally within a tower, right? They have like several floors, including below the grade, several floors, and that's the mall.
and the heights there are taller. And we'll come back to Hamilton, but
my point though is that like you said, the easy stuff's taken. But like, would we ever see that happen? Like if Sherway Gardens is like torn down and then replaced with a tower with Sherway Gardens built within?
at some point there, I'm going to get the name wrong, but it's at Richmond and John. There was like the Scotiabank movie theater there that was kind of like, it's not like a mall, but it's a movie theater with a bunch of different stuff. Like that was only built in the late 90s. Like they're knocking that down to build towers and build a new movie theater in the base. So
cool.
You gotta, the land values have to hit a certain point to sort of, when you've got a parking lot, there's a certain amount of construction costs that go in. Like you're demolishing a parking lot, not a large existing structure.
Yeah.
And it's not just the cost of bringing down the structure. It's like what's the current value when you look at the rents, the leases, all of that. So, one of those, I don't know, maybe not quite dead malls, but malls that weren't doing super well. If you go a couple, we're recording from QEW in Trafalgar. If you go a few exits down towards Erin Mills Parkway, there's Sheridan Mall, massive parking lot, not a super successful mall. Like they're looking at intensification opportunities there. Mississauga actually has.
It'd be a great location for intensification.
So Mississauga's kind of got within their urban planning structure, the long term, they've got 5 or 6 malls that they're looking at, like whether it's Sheridan Mall, whether it's I think it's North Common, and then Erin Mills Town Center. They're looking at these assets as areas to sort of intensify over the next 10 or 20 years. So we'll go further out. Talked about Lime Ridge and Hamilton. Yeah, I mean, 12 stories doesn't seem like all that much, but I guess sort of the demand land value there is a bit of a different equation than if you were looking at Sherway. Now, maybe if they looked at it years later, it would be different. There's the Eastgate Mall in Hamilton, which is going to be the last stop on the new LRT line. They're looking at a lot more than 12 stories there.
Great.
So there's multiple towers being considered, but again, that's on a future. That's going to be the anchor of a future, rapid transit line. So there's lots of puzzle pieces.
How come they're getting more than 12 stories, but poor Lime Ridge Mall didn't?
Lime Ridge Mall doesn't have the LRT coming.
Okay.
I'd go taller. I want to see 50 stories, 60 stories, 70. I don't know.
Because that's the only way we can really get squeeze prices down in terms of scale of economy.
Yeah, you get obviously efficiencies when the land value is X and you can squeeze more units out of it. Then you bring down the land value per unit. There are construction cost efficiencies when you're stacking and you're going taller up to a certain point. Once you get to 50 or 60 stories, there's issues around elevators, mass damper systems in terms of building sway, etc. So you start losing some of those efficiencies at a certain height, and then you've got to jump to a next much bigger height, or eat a lot of costs.
I was reading an article a couple of months ago. You probably saw it as well, but you have to there's a certain height and if you don't get above it, then it doesn't make any sense. And there's actually, I believe you know better than I would. There's some condos where you have to take an elevator and then to get out to take another elevator even further higher.
Yeah, on a personal level, I wouldn't love that. I used to live in a 40-something story tower, and we had 3 elevators. It was great, but once 1 or 2 elevators are down on service or it's moving day, it's obviously complicated. So I encourage buyers out there, don't just look at the suite, don't just look at the location. How many elevators are there? That makes a difference in your day-to-day quality of life. But yeah, Aura in Toronto is 75 stories. I think there's like a second elevator lobby. And there's some buildings, you mentioned the idea of putting a building on top of a mall. You're seeing some buildings where, you might go in at the ground level and then you got to take an elevator to the 10th floor to like the sky lobby, and then you change to the elevator to your unit, or different elevators for parking. So when you get into, I'll call it hyper-intensification, which to me is sort of like the Manhattanization, and there's a lot of really cool projects going up in downtown Toronto or Vancouver, but you get into some really complicated architectural and design issues when you're on a postage-size lot, and you've got to have the garbage, the entrance to the parking, the lobby, the mail room, all of your internal services. Development's fun.
So then the bigger question, I'm sure the listeners are probably pissed at me for not asking you earlier. So where are the opportunities? So for example, I get new developer builders always asking, I'm interested in buying land, lots of land, and sit on it or build something on it. Is that something one should get into these days?
I wouldn't recommend buying and sitting on land with the political dynamic. The provincial government reversed a bunch of boundary expansion things recently, and we'll see what happens with that. But that's an extremely, extremely risky and politically fraught exercise that can literally take decades. I'm not joking, like decades to move forward.
So you need piles of cash then.
You have to be very, very well capitalized and be prepared to lose it all. Or, I know people in the industry where individual projects aren't like a decade. It's like their career spans, a 25 or 30 year project to bring a raw piece of land and actually deliver keys to that buyer. But to go back to your original question on sort of where are the opportunities, and if you're not super well capitalized in building a tower or buying land, to me it's all missing middle housing, sort of that niche infill product, which on a personal level I just find more exciting. Like, it's cool kind of neighborhood level, trying to find opportunities, be it by something existing that can be either renovated, retrofitted, come down and split up and put in a small multiplex. And whether it's in the 905 in a more suburban context, or whether it's somewhere in an urbanizing corridor, like the future LRT corridor in Hamilton, there's so much, I find it cool infill design. Like there's a lot of opportunity there, and I think that's what people are hungry for, right? Like most people,
Yeah, renters love that stuff.
yeah,
Like buildings with
renters
character.
or first time buyers, like the so-called American or Canadian dream that you're gonna go to school, work hard, get a good job, and get that house with the white picket fence. Like most people don't have the ability to buy a $2 million place, and most people also don't want to drive to Sarnia or Owen Sound to be able to
Yeah.
afford something that's maybe not at that $1.5 million, $2 million price point. So what I find interesting to get the missing middle is you're not necessarily in a tiny condo unit shoebox in the sky. You can have an interesting design. You can still be in touch with the community because you're on the first, second, or third or fourth level. Even if you're higher up, you're still at the treetops. You're still looking out the window with the squirrels running around and can see people on the street. Opportunities to have mixed use, embed some retail in it. I think that's the future. We were chatting before the show about like other jurisdictions. Like our future in this region and area is probably going to look a lot more like Europe and maybe on the Manhattanization component a little more like Asia, but I don't think all of Hamilton or Oakville is going to be skyscrapers. It's going to be more of this infill kind of stuff.
Well, I support like cities wanting to maintain character, because then you kind of lose everything if you get rid of the character. And like historic buildings, and lots of parts of Ontario and Canada have houses that were built in the 1920s and earlier. So I don't think anyone wants to see that go away. Now, so say you're a beginner investor, what kind of missing middle infill project would you like to sink your teeth into?
I think there's two distinct routes. You can go with sort of the renovation conversion, so there's been some legislative zoning regulatory changes in Ontario that we used to have something called exclusionary zoning where, and this was North America wide, where basically wide swaths of, everywhere from San Francisco to Vancouver to Toronto to Hamilton, Oakville, Mississauga, wide swaths of land were only single-family homes were allowed. You couldn't even put a secondary suite in. You couldn't make it a semi-detached. You couldn't buy and split a lot and put in a semi or a townhome. It was singles only, and it sort of excluded all other housing typologies. I think as the housing crisis has gotten worse and worse and worse, and young people simply can't aspire to ever afford to live in the neighborhoods that a lot of them grew up in. There's been a lot of pressure politically to sort of, I'll call it, open up zoning to be a little more permissive. And we're not talking about putting up towers or mid-rise in existing communities. It's maintaining the character with something, planners often call gentle density or invisible density. Like if you're walking down the street, you're not really going to notice the difference between a 3-story infill little apartment with 6 units and a 2-story single-family home next to a semi. Like a lot of our historic neighborhoods in Hamilton or Toronto or Vancouver or Montreal are a whole mix of stuff. It only became like after the advent of the automobile and sort of the post-war suburbs that we got into this weird pattern of like only single-family homes.
Mm-hmm. And massive expansion of suburbs.
So that's where I think the opportunity is, either on the conversion side of buy an existing single and gut it or renovate it and put in, split it up into 2 or 3 units, or put in a secondary suite in the basement or sort of a laneway house in the back or above the garage. So then you've got the opportunity there to have a couple units in terms of an income stream. And most importantly, rather than one family living there, now you've got 2 or 3 families living there. They're utilizing the existing infrastructure. And you think about neighborhoods, like how do you have a cool neighborhood with a independent coffee shop on the corner or a cool bar down the road or an independent grocer? You need customers, you need people. So I think there's an opportunity across a lot of the suburbs for some intensification where you're increasing the population in existing areas, which increases opportunities for all kinds of other businesses. And I guess the other path instead of conversion is, you buy a property, you knock it down, and you either sever to build a couple small properties, or you take that single family home and put in a tiny townhouse or a little multiplex where there are 4 units.
So get this, like a friend of mine just came on the show, and he I didn't know, his name's Mackenzie. He lives in Calgary. He actually bought a single family home on a 60 by 100 lot. He's going to tear it down. This is Calgary. He's going to tear it down and build 4 townhouses on it, all of them with basement suites. So they're going to have 8 units on what was a single family home lot.
And that's what we got to do. Like, our population is growing like crazy, and we need opportunities everywhere. I always say we need to build up, in, and out. And up means a hell of a lot taller towers than we've had before, and the GTA's got more cranes in the skyline than any other jurisdiction in North America, which is healthy, but our population is growing so fast, it's not enough.
It's not really affordable either.
We need to grow out with some strategically located urban boundary expansions for new communities that are built differently than the kind of communities that we built in the past. You and I were chatting before the show, like if you go to Trafalgar and Dundas and North Oakville, like those are new communities, and they're being built at densities far higher than any of the suburbs that were built in the 70s, 80s, or 90s. And then the last is we need to grow in. So that's in our existing communities, and that's the opportunity for the missing middle, or your example of the single family lot that became 4 townhomes and the basement suites. So you go from 1 unit to 8 units.
Isn't that incredible?
If we could repeat that, and it doesn't always have to be 1 to 8, it could be 1 to 2, 1 to 3, 1 to 4. But from coast to coast across Canada, there are massive opportunities, and these are, strategically located in existing communities that have services, have character, have a vibe, places people want to live.
1 to 8 gets really tasty for an investor, though. You get more people to step up when the returns are there. Then more people will do it, right? And like I know how difficult it is to get things done. Like I used to live in Burlington, and we won't get into how tough it is to get things built there. But like for example, I was looking at East Austin, where prices are incredibly affordable, and those neighborhoods have reputations for being extremely developer friendly. So would you consider investing further away, out of home? Out of your home city?
I'm not super familiar with the U.S. market, so I'm not the right person to ask. But right. Obviously having a diverse portfolio is useful. I'm on a personal level, I like to be able to see, feel, touch.
Yeah.
My real estate to me is it's real estate. It's real. Like I like it as an investment vehicle in terms of it being a tangible asset, and I manage my own assets and know our tenants, and there's a different kind of comfort level there. But when you mention it being so much easier in Austin versus here, I think a lot of the reason we're in this housing crisis is the level of bureaucracy, the level of control. I mentioned earlier, everything's a political approval.
But isn't it by design? Because it is a democracy. It is the voters generally do not want density in their backyards.
100% agree, but that's why we need to change. We need to come at things from a perspective of housing abundance. And maybe not every investor will like to hear that, because I think one of the reasons why housing's been so lucrative as an investment is it's the opposite of housing abundance. We have a system of deliberately constrained supply, and our democratic institutions have led to that. So we have a bizarre system where existing residents and neighbors seem to get a veto over who comes to their neighborhood. And to me, that's fundamentally wrong, especially in a growing society. And it's, the local interest is different than the public interest.
And the greater good, I'd argue.
The greater good. And a lot of that local interest, and I'll get slammed for saying this, but a lot of it's like a particular demographic. You go to any public meeting where there's, I don't know, a 6-story mid-rise being proposed in an existing neighborhood. Like, go to that public meeting, and the demographic's pretty similar.
Right. What's all the local homeowners?
Yeah, a lot of old white people who have money.
That's just who lives there, though.
Yeah.
Versus like in a more fair argument would be the future tenants should be there as well, but they don't know or the future home occupants.
Nobody speaks for the future residents. Nobody speaks for the young folks or the new immigrants or the those that are international students and non-permanent residents.
Yeah, they're not getting a vote in this. They're not at at these meetings. They're not emotionally as charged as the locals are.
And I'm
They don't get a vote
somewhat
either.
empathetic to the locals in that people fear change, and for better or for worse, development, housing, our industry is all about change. But if Canada is going to be successful in the future, this might be one of the biggest issues, if not the biggest issue that we're facing as a country, that young people are screwed. Like, you can go to school, you can get a good job, like, good luck.
Yeah, you're screwed. Unless you have rich parents.
Yeah. If you can't afford a house, if you tried richer parents. That's not really what we should be building as a country. And we've got some very successful post-secondary institutions where we've got like the best and the brightest from all around the world are coming here. And they're coming here to learn, and they can't afford to stay or find suitable accommodations. So we're educating them, and then they're going to leave, or young people are going to leave. And our growth is a good thing to have, but we have so much growth that we're not keeping up on housing and infrastructure, and we need to fundamentally change how we approach housing. And it's politically uncomfortable. Politicians, they're listening to the existing residents, and those existing residents typically are well housed, and the plight of the 26-year-old doesn't matter to them.
I'll never forget how the neighbor association was fighting these new student residents next to McMaster University, saying they thought it was too tall at 6 stories or whatever it is. Like, this is exactly what you should want: densification of students in one area so they stay out of your neighborhoods.
Yeah, and otherwise,
but
now
they fought
they're
that too.
filled throughout the neighborhood. I mean, yeah, I love
They
that
fought
kind of
against what was in their best
NIMBYism.
interest.
You move right next to a university and don't like students. It's like, okay.
But didn't you fight the building that's going to house all the students, right? You should be encouraging them. No, build it to 20 stories. Build it to 50 stories. I want all the students out of the neighborhood. They can all live in that building.
And this is why, in my view, the provincial and federal governments need to be a lot more assertive, because the municipal governments, councillors are beholden, and MPs and MPPs are elected too, but they're a little more distant from the day-to-day cut and thrust of neighborhood politics. Your average local councillor, the stuff they're hearing about is development and housing issues, or I don't know, the snowplow didn't come this morning, or people don't like people parking on the street. Like, it's very neighborhood-driven constituent issues, and they're extremely responsive to the development issues. And we need to find more ways of getting to a yes. And the easy answer is often no, or it's yes after a whole series of compromises. And the number of buildings that have been built in this area all through the GTA and Golden Horseshoe, where, I don't know, it's proposed at 20 stories. It goes through 2 years of planning process and negotiation with the neighborhood and councillor, and, they chop off 3 or 4 stories, and somehow that's a success. Oh, we got it down to 16 stories, success, everybody's happy. It's sort of like, well, the developer or builder was willing to go for 20. We just lost 4 stories. Maybe that's 40 units of housing that we could have had. Yeah. Now we don't have. Well, you multiply that over hundreds and hundreds of projects over the course of a decade. Like, we flushed tens of thousands of units down the toilet over negotiations in church basements because somebody doesn't want a shadow on their tomato plant for a few hours a day. Like, what's our priority here?
Yeah, and then we forego all those property taxes as well that the city could have collected.
Yeah, and everybody that owns property right now knows, like, there's so much pressure on our municipal budgets with inflation and property taxes. Like, the best solution is assessment growth, and that's new housing and new commercial and new industrial. But yeah, all of those, I guess, invisible or ghost floors that never got built. Those would have been a lot of property taxes.
And now I don't know where it's going to end up, but in the news, the proposed tax increase for Hamilton was 14% for next year. So here the tax bills come to be paid now. And also Bill 23 is also basically, we have to subsidize developers to build.
Oh, I'm going to push back on you on that one. Bill 23 and the municipalities have been very good at blaming. They don't want to take responsibility for their own problems. So they want to find a boogeyman, so they blame the province and blame developers. Bill 23 did make some changes to the Development Charges Act. It does not make any changes to the development charges that private sector for-profit builders pay for anything they build beyond a couple $100 taken off on community housing. Everything else is full freight. They have removed development charges from affordable housing projects. So if Habitat for Humanity, the YWCA, or another nonprofit builder shows up to build below market nonprofit housing, there are no development charges. Now, philosophically, I wonder, like, why the hell were they paying development charges to begin with? Like, should we be full freight taxing affordable housing for the most vulnerable? Like, that should be where the government's trying to help out.
Because they stopped building houses, so you need to subsidize someone instead.
Yeah, so the changes in Bill 23 are entirely focused on nonprofit affordable housing. There are some reductions on purpose-built rental, which we're hardly building any of anyway. And it's things like, I think it's like a 25% reduction on 3-bedroom units. Well, like, that's the stuff that we, we should be designing our tax system in a way that tries to encourage certain things. But in the current environment, like, we tax housing like cigarettes and booze. It's like a sin tax. If you buy a new house, 25% of that's straight up taxes. Straight up taxes. So you wonder why we're in this mess. Like, if the average cost, I'm just going to use round numbers. If the average cost of a new house or a new townhome somewhere is $1 million, 250 of that's taxes. Like, that is insane.
And that's all the taxes. You combine all the taxes together.
Yeah, so you've got the federal government's got the GST, so that's 5% right there. There were rebates structured for homes between $350 and $450, but good luck finding a house for under $350,000. You've got the provincial share of the HST, which is 8%. You subtract a $24,000 HST new home tax credit, but that's nothing in the grand scheme of things. So you got the 5% plus 8%, so you're at 13% right there. You got about 2% land transfer tax. There you've hit about 15%. There's all kinds of other smaller fees and charges that go to the province. So yeah, you're already at 15, 16%, and then you've got development charges, which are massive. They can be over $100,000 a door in some jurisdictions. You get to the smaller units like apartments, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom condos, like depending on which municipality you're in, you're still over $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 for those. And then beyond the development charges, there are community benefits charges. In low rise, you have parkland dedication. We need parks, so I don't have a problem with that per se. They take 5% of the land on a low rise project, but on a high rise project, they take cash in lieu. So there's some municipalities that's $20,000, $30,000 right there. So yeah, things we need like parks, but like it adds up. And then all of the permit fees, planning fees. So that's the straight up taxes that you easily hit the 25% there. And then in terms of the total tax envelope, like all of the workers and trades on site, they're all paying WSIB, they're all paying income taxes. And then of course the company itself is paying corporate taxes. So yeah, you have about 25% straight up taxes on the purchase price. And then there's other layers of tax embedded in. So you're probably easily over 30%.
Evil builders.
Yes, the evil builders that are generating massive amounts of tax revenue for our provincial and federal governments, building new communities, putting a lot of risk on the line to build a product we desperately need, and it's taxed as if it's booze or cigarettes.
I still think the municipalities are screwed up and not because they've blocked so much development, made it so difficult that the bills come due. That's just how I look at it from an outsider's point of view. And also I don't understand why, like, it felt like the bill never came due for the pandemic. Like, for example, let's take Toronto, for example, that the TTC was still operating while no revenue was coming in. Well, I'm surprised they don't blame things like that.
Yeah,
Instead, they throw Bill 23 under the bus.
I mean, the whole transit system's a whole other conversation. Like, we need transit for cities to run. And,
we do, but let's just be honest about where the expenses are coming from, where the bill came due.
Well, the feds in the province helped there, but I think you phrased it right. Like, the bills come due for the pandemic, and part of the increases in property...
And the lack of development.
And the lack of development. And
the lack of property taxes that would have come from development.
Yeah, municipalities don't have enough different revenue tools, and it's either, it's basically property taxes, or like they thrust so much on the backs of development. And one of the reasons why you mentioned Austin earlier, like most jurisdictions in the United States don't have development charges in any way, shape, or form like we do. They've got some different kind of impact fees, but Ontario's pretty unique in it being around 25% is tax. You don't get that in American jurisdictions. You don't get that across much of the rest of the Canada, except for sort of the lower mainland in Vancouver is also a very, very high tax environment. But you go out to Alberta or the Maritimes, yeah, there's development charges, but they don't have the scale of taxation that we do. So we've dug ourselves a pretty deep hole that we're in this housing crisis. We need to build more. Our planning system's broken, and we tax the hell out of new development. But I don't have there's no silver bullet. There's no easy answer because, frankly, municipalities do need a lot of this revenue. Back in the day, the feds in the province put more money into growth-related infrastructure than they do now. Everything's been downloaded to municipalities, and effectively municipalities have then downloaded it onto the private sector. And then the private sector, like our builders aren't paying the development charges, it gets embedded in the cost of the housing.
Mm-hmm.
So you're a young first-time home buyer or the investor who's listening, you're paying for all of that infrastructure, not up front. You're then embedding it into your 25-year mortgage, and you're paying the amortization on that infrastructure, growth-related infrastructure.
Yeah.
So it's the home buyers
Yeah.
and the investors that are paying for all of this embedded in their mortgages. It's pretty painful.
Because the can's been kicked down the road, and someone's got to eventually pay for it.
Somebody's got to pay for it.
And then now the next generation is really going to pay for it.
Yeah, and we talked earlier about like the escalating cost of construction, that it's running higher than inflation. Well, that's not just to build a house or build a tower. Like for municipalities, building a bridge, building a road, building a sewer, building a library, construction costs are up across the board in terms of the hard construction costs. And
Sorry, can you break that down? Like how is labor and materials compared to pre-pandemic, for example?
there was a study I mentioned earlier of I think the top 11 municipalities in Canada, and they said that the hard construction costs were up 54% since the beginning of 2019, just before the pandemic. I can tell people that the costs are starting to ease a little bit. Sales activity has slowed. There's still a lot of stuff under construction, but there's not a lot of new stuff starting construction. So demand is starting to ease off. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel in terms of some of those costs starting to ease up. I'm talking to some builders when they're looking at go-forward contracts. It's not quite as bad as it was before. There's a little more competition, but we still have labor shortages. It's not all bad. Things are getting better, but we need to build a hell of a lot more with the population coming. So if things are easing, that's great, but like the long-term arc, we've got issues.
Where do you see prices going? It's November 2023 right now.
Oh, I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. I mean, I think as long as interest rates remain elevated, probably pretty sideways, if we actually have another 25 basis point increase, like I could see them dropping a little bit. It's funny. So there are two different markets, the resale and new. On the resale side, there's more room for stuff to drop because if somebody needs to sell their house, they're going to sell their house. And there's lots of people that don't need to sell, but there are divorces, deaths, people moving jobs. Like there's always people that need to sell. And if they need to sell, they'll drop the price. Whereas on the new construction side, the cost of land is the cost of land. Labor may be easing a little bit, but not significantly, and they still need contingencies. And we just talked about the cost of materials. And then, of course, we just finished the conversation on taxes. Like, I don't think the city of Hamilton or Toronto or Oakville or Mississauga are going to massively cut development charges. The province and the feds don't sound like they're going to massively cut GST or HST or land transfer tax, although the feds and province have reduced or eliminated GST on purpose-built rental, which is an absolute game changer in terms of making those pro formas work. So that there are positive things happening, but it makes it more difficult on the new side to actually cut prices. So they just won't launch. So that there are projects sitting on the sidelines that are probably ready to go, but if the revenue can't cover the expenses and costs, they just won't launch.
So they're ready to go in terms of they have their approvals, they just haven't started selling them yet.
Exactly. Or they've started selling them and sales aren't really going anywhere, and they're not going to cut their prices.
Right.
So
So they're willing
they'll
to
wait.
just wait. Yeah.
They'll wait. I mean, you may see a tiny bit of easing off, but you're not going to see big price cuts.
What allows them to wait? Just like strong capitalization, strong cash positions.
I mean, if somebody's in trouble, then they may be willing to cut prices. But the other component here is like a builder or developer, like it's not 100% capitalized themselves. Like they've got partners in financing in the banks, right? Like the banks, you've got your term sheet. The banks aren't going to move forward on a construction loan if the project's not viable. And if you start slashing revenue in an environment where the banks are getting even more conservative because they've seen where prices and costs have gone up over the last number of years, they want to see a contingency. And of course, there's the higher interest rate environment. So there's a profit squeeze, but then there's also a squeeze on the financing side because like money is not as liquid as it was before. Like everybody's tightening up. So to me, that just means on the new side, I don't see prices coming down. But as I said, on the resale side, yeah, they could ease up a little bit. Like I'm hopeful, and I'm sure all your listeners are hopeful, that the Bank of Canada will start easing up at some point in 2024. I don't think it's going to happen in early 2024, but whenever it does happen, I think you'll see a lot more optimism in the market, because once they start cutting, they're probably not going to turn around and start going up again. So that's sort of an indication
Right.
of the long term. I don't think we're ever going to get back to where we were at the depths of the pandemic, where basically like it was the lowest it could possibly be. But as we ease up a little bit, I think more buyers will come back into the market. There'll be more optimism, and things will start moving again.
Because that's the funny thing is we are a housing crisis, but we're in a buyer's market though.
But that's the long-term problem is the population's still growing. People are still coming. So we're in a weird spot right now, because when you start, like,
But the people coming in aren't allowed to buy either because we have foreign buyer taxes.
but they need a place to live. So whether it's investors buying and they can rent. So
Investors ain't buying right now.
there's still a lot of housing completions happening right now by virtue of the stuff that started construction before. So there's a lagging impact. So if in 2023 and 2024 and maybe into 2020, we're not starting a lot of new projects, that doesn't really start showing up in sort of supply deficiencies for 2 or 3 years later as to when they'll be complete. So as things have slowed down this year and next year, the issue is 2 or 3 years down the road when there's a lack of completions, there's a lack of stuff coming on, and that'll be potentially when the market's going gangbusters again, because interest rates have come down, more people are buying, we still have the population growth, but in that very moment, there's not going to be a lot of new stuff coming onto the market.
And then we're back to Hunger Games for housing.
Yeah.
Sad state of affairs. So you already mentioned that you don't see prices really coming down for new construction. So there's no technological major advances that will cause deflation in real estate. Unlike that YouTube I told you about, I saw with the 3D printing of houses.
So one of the biggest, I think, faults of the industry that I'm in is productivity is an issue. We have a serious lack of skilled trades. We've got a wave of retirements. Like if anybody goes to a new construction site, you'd be surprised by the average age if you walk around. It's not a bunch of young guys.
Oh, they're near retirement then.
Yeah, there's a lot of folks near retirement. The government's done better. There are more new entrants coming in now than there were before. There's a lot more people in the apprenticeship system, but there's such a gap, especially with retirements coming. So one of the biggest issues our industry faces is we've got to improve productivity. We need fewer people to do more, and one of the biggest ways that we can do that is more technology, shifting more towards modular pre-production. If you look at other jurisdictions in Asia, in Europe, there's a lot more modular factory-built housing. And I don't necessarily mean the whole house is built in the factory. I mean, you're building a mid-rise or a high-rise. There may be like wall assembly components that come in on the back of a flatbed truck and then are assembled. So I was in a plant in Sweden back in 2017, and it was amazing. It was looking at these wall assemblies where, they could tell me there's exactly 36 nails and the precision is within like a couple millimeters, and there's
Nice.
7 layers to the wall in terms of all of the insulation, vapor barrier, or whatever. And rather than being assembled outdoors like we do here in the winter while the wind's howling, right? Like it's built in a factory environment, just like we build cars, and then it shows up on site, and it's kind of like, I don't know, assembled like Lego or Meccano versus each piece by itself.
Any idea how much cost savings there are in such a model?
You probably pick up costs somewhere, you probably lose costs somewhere. So I don't have an exact figure for you. I think that the main eye-opening component is the productivity and less manpower required
Those are
when we go
important.
towards the automation. So there's cost savings there in 2 ways. It's the productivity and the labor power, but there's also speed.
Yeah.
These projects are able to be built faster.
Oh.
One thing that it hasn't taken off in Canada yet, but there are some mid-rises being built out of like mass timber wood versus concrete, and because of the time it takes concrete to cure and all of that, you can build a mid-rise wood building faster than you can build a mid-rise concrete building, but there's other
Great.
technological issues there.
Right, but it's also fire retardant. I YouTubed that one as well.
Yeah, the mass timber, like people sort of think, oh, it's wood, it's going to burn.
Yeah, burn like a
no,
match.
It doesn't. It's like these mass timber, sort of cross laminate timber, their burn rates. Some of them in tests last longer than steel. Like the steel will melt before.
Yeah.
Like these wood columns are thick. Like they will char and harden.
I think I saw it on your Twitter. Either you or someone else were conversing about it on Twitter, and that's where I learned about mass timber.
Yeah, it's taken off big time in Europe, especially in Scandinavia. We've got some mass timber stuff going up here, not as much as I thought there would be when the building code was changed in 2015 or 2016. There's some more code changes coming. But yeah, there's a handful of projects on the Toronto waterfront. There was a demonstration project in Vancouver at UBC that's actually 18 floors. A couple on the waterfront in Grimsby. So they're here and there. It hasn't taken off in a massive way, but there are a number of companies that do build mass timber.
Super cool. And I want to circle back to the membership. Like, what is a member? Because I think everyone, I'm cheap, so I will go to a nonprofit to see what I can learn and who I can network with. At least try it out, right? Like, how much is a membership at West End Home Builders Association?
For a builder, it's around $2,000. An associate member, which is a non-builder, I'm not going to have the exact number. It's somewhere around $1,400 or $1,500.
That's not much.
And that also
For the year?
For the year, and it also we're a 3-tier association. So with that fee, you automatically become a member of the Ontario Home Builders Association and the Canadian Home Builders Association, and there's all kinds of benefits there, networking opportunities.
It's the same as a
committees.
gym membership. That's not much.
Yeah, it's an integrated network from coast to coast, from St. John's, Newfoundland, right out to Vancouver Island.
And again, like all the biggest players will be there.
All of the biggest companies are there in terms of those building our cities, building our communities, and as I said, it's not just the builders. It's the lumber yards, the financial institutions. There's tons of small independent businesses because they find it's a great way to, rather than spending all your money on advertising into the sea and hoping somebody sees you. It's very targeted. You join an association.
Where
It's kind of like a
everyone is.
chamber of commerce, right? You join an association, you target a particular client base, and you get out there and you network and you show your product off and get some business.
So, I don't like giving advice, but shouldn't everyone who's considering being a builder or developer be a part of their local builders association?
I wouldn't say everyone. I think ethical, strong business practices are critical. And look, there are some people out there that have a different way of doing business, and we don't want them as part of our
I
membership.
know. I assume they're good people. They're listening to this show, so they're likely good people.
All right. Well, for all your listeners, check out, just Google West End Home Builders Association. If you're in the Hamilton area, if you're in a different area, check out the Ontario Home Builders Association. And, there'll be a listing there of, the London, Kingston, wherever you are, there is a local chapter.
And then how if someone wants to join, what's the process like? Do they get a free month or anything like that, or?
Everyone's different. So for us in the Hamilton area, we have a fall membership deal going on right now. So it's the beginning of November. If you join now, you can become a member now, but you don't pay your fee until 2024. And you pay the 2024 year, and you get the rest of this year for free.
It's 2 months free. Nice.
We got lots of events. We got our President's Gala coming up in a week, AGM, where we've got some great guest speakers and economists coming, couple networking socials. We also do a lot of professional development. So those that are interested in building and the building science, like there are some pretty major building code changes coming up, and rather than reading about them or YouTubing about them, we've got some of the top instructors in the country coming in for a detailed hands-on course around some of the technical building science changes to the building code.
You guys had Dr. Mike Moffat on as well as a past guest?
Yeah, so we did a really cool research project. I've done 2 or 3 now with Mike Moffat. So we had an event in the spring where he was our keynote speaker and ran through a lot of his research. He's awesome. So, it's a networking event, but includes a lot of good information. So we're all about information, professional development, education, a diversity of events. I mean, tonight we literally have an under 40 pub crawl, so I don't know how educational it'll be, but there'll be 50, 60 young entrepreneurs out, and what better way of making business contacts or socializing, over a beer at a pub somewhere. So we try to capture a variety of different opportunities and options. And look, if your social network is your business network, you're probably doing pretty well.
That's awesome. That's super awesome. Everyone should check it out. And for $14.50 a year, that's really cheap compared to because I see masterminds and whatnot being offered.
Well, now you got me thinking maybe I should hike my fees, but
yeah, fine. Yeah, it'll be a shadow of what these masterminds cost at $10,000 a year. Mike, we're running out of time. Anything else you want to share that I haven't asked?
No, I mean, I hear a lot of pessimism out there about the market and where things are
short
with
term.
interest rates. But yeah, it's short term. The great thing about real estate is it's real. There are ups and downs. It is a cyclical market. Canada is the place to be, right? The population here is growing so fast that it's causing challenges. But I think the long-term arc for real estate investment, for housing, for land development, it's a solid business to be in.
Yeah, because you don't see anyone developers are still buying land. People are still accumulating stuff.
As Mark Twain once said, buy land, they don't make any more of it.
Yeah, I don't know if you knew about Ontario, how fast we're growing so fast here.
Well, the latest population estimates, I got my one stat here. Canada's population grew by 1.15 million from July 22 to July 23. It's the biggest jump in all of the G7. Our population growth rate is 2.9%. I don't think we're going to maintain this level, but if we stay at that level, we will literally double in population in the next 25 years. So, we're well on our way, from the 40 million to 50 million to 60 million, and the whole country's growing, but it's places like the Greater Golden Horseshoe, Vancouver, that we're going to be superstar international cities in terms of just dynamic global cities.
Any idea what our growth rate's going to be going forward? Because I think there seems to be rumblings that the people in general are not happy with the growth rate it is, and you're seeing it with the government as well.
I certainly support growth. We need growth. We need the labor.
Because we're not having babies.
Yeah, and the rest of the world's growing. We got to remain competitive. That being said, I think there is some fraying of the social fabric, and I think a lot of that has to do with the cost of housing. People want safe, secure housing,
Affordable.
attainable. I use the word attainable versus affordable for your average
I like
middle class family. Like that's sort of the nest egg and the idea of being able to buy a home, and that could be a condo, townhome, like whatever, and you know, that is sort of the nest egg of sort of growing your equity and being able to retire and provide for your family, and that's kind of been broken in the last 5 to 10 years, and I worry in the long run if Canada keeps growing at this pace, and if we don't figure out this housing issue. You know, I don't want to get too political, but I just think we're seeing a lot more polarization in our society right now. That could get worse.
Probably worse, yeah.
If more and more people are left behind, and housing is the key ingredient to a stable society.
Yeah, and who's most pissed off and who tends to protest? Young people. And they're rightfully pissed off.
They should be pissed off.
They should be pissed off.
I think I've said it a couple times, like, you can work hard, you can do all the right things, and if you're in your early 30s and still living in mom and dad's basement, or, you know, with crappy roommates in an overcrowded place, like, that's
Sucks.
yeah, that would make me angry too.
Oh, yeah. Mike, thanks so much for doing this.
Thanks for the time.
Thank you for watching. If you want to learn how to invest in real estate from scratch, my team teaches beginners how to use the #1 investment strategy that I personally use in a virtual free training class every month. Go to investortraining.ca/YouTube to register for our next class. The link is also in the description as well. I publish at least 2 to 3 videos a week here, so subscribe if you want to keep learning from seasoned investors like myself and my guests. And if you're just starting out, feel free to ask questions and comment below, and I do the best to answer each of those comments and questions myself. Again, if you're ready to learn the nitty-gritty about real estate investing from a professional investor, register for our next virtual class. That's at investortraining.ca/YouTube. Thanks again for watching. See you in the next video.